November 5, 1994. Ronald Reagan sits alone in his private study, staring at a letter he's written but can't remember writing. The handwriting is his, but the words feel like they belong to a stranger. At 83, the most powerful man in American history is losing the one thing that made him great: his mind. But what happened in the next 72 hours would shock even his closest family members. Because Reagan wasn't just fighting Alzheimer's disease, he was fighting time itself to make one final decision that would determine America's future. The diagnosis had come 2 years earlier, in secret. Not even Nancy knew the full truth. Reagan's personal physician, Dr. John Hutton, had sworn an oath of silence. The symptoms were getting worse by the day, but Reagan had been hiding them with the same acting skills that once made him a Hollywood star. During cabinet meetings, he would write notes to himself beforehand, memorizing talking points like lines in a script. When he forgot names, he would call everyone "my friend" with that trademark smile. But behind closed doors, the man who had stared down the Soviet Union was terrified of forgetting his own name. The letter on his desk was addressed to the American people. It was his confession, his goodbye. But there was something else in that study that nobody knew about, something that would change everything. Hidden behind a false panel in his bookshelf was a black briefcase. Inside were documents so classified that only 3 people in America knew they existed. And now, with his memory failing, Reagan faced an impossible choice. The briefcase contained the real nuclear codes, not the ones carried by the military aide who followed him everywhere. These were different. These were the codes that could override any decision made by future presidents, a final failsafe that Reagan had created in secret during his darkest moments of the Cold War. The problem was simple but terrifying. If Reagan's mind deteriorated completely, he might forget these codes existed. But if he revealed them to someone else, he would be giving that person the power to end the world. Dr. Hutton had warned him that he had maybe 6 months before the disease progressed too far. 6 months to decide whether to destroy the codes forever or pass them on to someone he trusted completely. But here's what shocked everyone who knew Reagan. The person he was considering wasn't his vice president. It wasn't his secretary of defense. It wasn't even Nancy. It was Mikhail Gorbachev. The former Soviet leader had become Reagan's closest friend in the years since the Cold War ended. They spoke on the phone every month, sharing jokes and memories like old war buddies. Gorbachev was the only person alive who truly understood the weight of holding the world's fate in your hands. That night, as Reagan stared at the letter in the briefcase, he made a decision that would have been considered treason by his own government. He picked up his private phone and dialed Moscow.
"Mikhail," Reagan said when Gorbachev answered, "I need to see you. It's important." Gorbachev could hear something different in his old friend's voice. A tremor. A confusion that hadn't been there before. "Ronald, what is wrong? You sound—" "I'm sick, Mikhail. Very sick. And I need to tell you something before I forget how to tell you." What Reagan revealed in that phone call would have sent shockwaves through both governments. He told Gorbachev about the secret codes, about the failsafe system he had built, about the power to override any nuclear decision made by future American leaders. But most shocking of all, he told Gorbachev that he wanted to give him the codes. "You are the only person I trust not to use them," Reagan said quietly, "and the only person I trust to make sure they're never used." Gorbachev was silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "Ronald, if your people discovered this, they would call you a traitor." "Maybe. But if some madman becomes president someday, if someone decides to start a nuclear war, You would be the only one who could stop them. You understand what these weapons can do, Mikhail. You've seen what I've seen. 3 days later, Gorbachev arrived in California under complete secrecy. No government officials knew about his visit. No security details. Just two old men meeting in Reagan's Bel Air home to discuss the fate of humanity. Nancy Reagan had been told that Mikhail was coming for a social visit. She prepared tea and cookies, thinking it was just another friendly chat between the two former leaders. She had no idea she was witnessing the most important secret meeting in modern history. Reagan led Gorbachev to his study and showed him the briefcase. Inside were 12 plastic cards, each containing a different nuclear override code. Each one could prevent or trigger a nuclear strike, regardless of what any American president or military commander decided. I created these during the Iran hostage crisis, Reagan explained, his hands shaking slightly as he held the cards. I was terrified that someone might force my hand, make me do something that would end the world. So I built a back door, a way to say no. Gorbachev studied the cards with a mixture of awe and horror. Ronald, this is incredible. You had the power to stop any nuclear war. Or start one, Reagan admitted. That's why I can't let them fall into the wrong hands. My mind is going, Mikhail. Some days I can't remember Nancy's name. But I can't forget these codes exist. But what Reagan told Gorbachev next would haunt the former Soviet leader for the rest of his life. The codes weren't just theoretical. Reagan had already used them once.
I used them during the Able Archer incident, Reagan said quietly, referring to the 1983 NATO exercise that had nearly triggered World War III. Your people thought we were planning a real first strike. Your submarines were preparing to launch. I had 14 minutes to decide whether to let our military respond or use the override codes to stand down. Gorbachev's face went pale. He remembered Able Archer 83. Soviet intelligence had been convinced that NATO's war games were cover for an actual attack. The Kremlin had been hours away from launching a preemptive strike. You stopped it, Gorbachev whispered. You saved both our countries. I chose to trust you, Reagan replied. Even though you were our enemy then, I believed you didn't want nuclear war any more than I did. I was right. Reagan reached into his desk and pulled out a thick folder. Inside were detailed records of every time the override codes had been considered for use. During the Lebanese Civil War, when American troops were under attack. During the Libya bombing, when Soviet advisors were killed. During dozens of crises that the public never knew about. 17 times, Reagan said. 17 times I had to decide whether to trust other world leaders or end civilization. I chose trust every time. But the next president might not. Gorbachev understood the weight of what Reagan was offering him. The codes would make him the most powerful man on Earth, capable of preventing any nuclear war or stopping any American president from using atomic weapons. Why me, Ronald? Why not your own people? Reagan's answer would become one of the most important statements never recorded in history books. Because you're the only person who's ever pointed nuclear weapons at America and chose not to fire them. You had your finger on the trigger for 40 years, Mikhail. You could have ended us at any time, but you didn't. That's not politics. That's character. The two men spent the next 6 hours going through every code, every protocol, every scenario where the override system might be needed. Reagan's memory would slip occasionally, but he would force himself to focus, knowing this might be his last chance to transfer this knowledge. But then Nancy Reagan knocked on the study door. "Ronnie, you've been in there all day. Mikhail must be getting hungry." When Reagan opened the door, Nancy saw something that terrified her. Her husband's eyes were vacant, confused. For a moment, he stared at her like she was a stranger. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I can't remember. I can't..." Gorbachev watched in horror as Reagan's mind seemed to slip away in real time. The man who had just been explaining complex nuclear protocols was now struggling to recognize his own wife. That's when Gorbachev made a decision that would change everything.
"Ronald, look at me," Gorbachev said firmly. "Remember who you are. You are the President of the United States. You are the man who ended the Cold War. You are Ronald Wilson Reagan." Something in Gorbachev's voice seemed to anchor Reagan. His eyes cleared slightly, and he nodded. But they both knew this was temporary. The disease was winning. "I can't take these codes," Gorbachev said quietly. "But I have a better idea." What Gorbachev proposed shocked even Reagan in his confused state. Instead of transferring the codes to one person, they would destroy them together. But first, they would create a new system. Gorbachev suggested that they write a joint letter to be opened only in the event of imminent nuclear war. The letter would be kept in a Swiss bank vault, accessible only if both the American president and the Russian leader agreed that nuclear weapons were about to be used. "We remove the power from any one person," Gorbachev explained. "We make it so that nuclear war can only happen if both our countries agree it's necessary. And we both know that will never happen." Reagan's face lit up with the clarity of his old self. A nuclear peace treaty, not between governments, but between people who understand what these weapons really mean. Over the next hour, they drafted the letter together. It contained detailed instructions for de-escalating nuclear conflicts, contact information for peace negotiators, and most importantly, a personal plea from both leaders to any future president or premier who might consider using atomic weapons. The letter ended with a simple sentence written in both Reagan's and Gorbachev's handwriting. "The survivors will never forgive you." They placed the letter in a sealed envelope along with all 12 override codes. Reagan personally carried it to a Swiss bank in Geneva 3 weeks later, during what the press was told was a routine medical checkup. But the most shocking part of this story happened 6 months later, when Reagan's Alzheimer's had progressed to the point where he could no longer hide it from the public. On the day Reagan announced his diagnosis to the world, he received a phone call. Nancy answered, and the voice on the other end spoke heavily accented English. "Mrs. Reagan, this is Mikhail Gorbachev. I wanted to tell your husband something while he can still understand me." Nancy brought the phone to Reagan, who was sitting in his favorite chair, staring out at the California sunset. "Ronald," Gorbachev said, "I want you to know that our secret is safe. And I want you to know that because of what we did together, my granddaughter will grow up in a world without the fear of nuclear war." You saved her before she was even born." Reagan smiled and spoke clearly for what might have been the last time. "We saved each other, old friend. We saved each other." The Swiss bank vault still exists today. The letter and codes remain sealed, waiting for a crisis that hopefully never comes. 3 people know the vault's location: the bank president, who was sworn to secrecy, and 2 retired world leaders who chose trust over terror. Reagan died in 2004, having forgotten almost everything about his life, but his nurses noted something strange. Even in his final days, when he couldn't recognize his own children, he would sometimes smile and say one word clearly: Mikhail. Gorbachev attended Reagan's funeral, sitting quietly in the back, unknown to most of the mourners. When asked by a reporter why he had come, Gorbachev said simply, "I am saying goodbye to the man who saved the world." Nobody understood what he meant. But somewhere in Switzerland, a letter waits in a vault written by 2 enemies who became friends and chose to trust humanity's future to wisdom instead of weapons. The most powerful secret in human history remains locked away, guarded by the promise 2 old men made to each other on a California afternoon when one of them was losing his mind, but found his conscience.